ਵਾਹਿਗੁਰੂ ਜੀ ਕਾ ਖਾਲਸਾ ਵਾਹਿਗੁਰੂ ਜੀ ਕੀ ਫਤਿਹ। ਖਾਸ ਮੁਲਾਕਾਤ ਪ੍ਰੋਗਰਾਮ ਵਿੱਚ ਆਪ ਸਭ ਨੂੰ ਜੀ ਆਇਆਂ ਆਖਦੇ ਹਾਂ। ਅੱਜ ਦੀ ਖਾਸ ਮੁਲਾਕਾਤ ਮਈ ਦੇ ਮਹੀਨੇ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਯੂਨਾਈਟਿਡ ਕਿੰਗਡਮ ਦੀ ਇਲੈਕਸ਼ਨਸ ਆ ਰਹੀਆਂ ਹਨ ਅਤੇ ਅਸੀਂ ਆਪਣੀ ਇਸ ਮੁਲਾਕਾਤ ਦੀ ਸੀਰੀਜ਼ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਉਹ ਸ਼ਖਸੀਅਤਾਂ, ਸਾਡੇ ਉਹ ਪੋਲੀਟੀਸ਼ੀਅਨ ਜਿਹੜੇ ਕਿ ਇਸ ਕੰਟਰੀ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਮੇਨ ਸਟ੍ਰੀਮ ਪੋਲਿਟਿਕਸ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਬਹੁਤ ਵੱਡਾ ਰੋਲ ਪਲੇ ਕਰਦੇ ਹਨ, ਅੱਜ ਸਾਡੇ ਨਾਲ ਮੌਜੂਦ ਹਨ ਪਰਮਜੀਤ ਸਿੰਘ ਜੀ ਟਾਂਡਾ। ਪਰਮਜੀਤ ਸਿੰਘ ਜੀ, ਵਾਹਿਗੁਰੂ ਜੀ ਕਾ ਖਾਲਸਾ ਵਾਹਿਗੁਰੂ ਜੀ ਕੀ ਫਤਿਹ। ਸਭ ਤੋਂ ਪਹਿਲਾਂ ਆਪ ਜੀ ਨੂੰ ਜੀ ਆਇਆਂ ਨੂੰ ਸੰਗਤ ਟੈਲੀਵਿਜ਼ਨ ਇਸ ਖਾਸ ਮੁਲਾਕਾਤ ਪ੍ਰੋਗਰਾਮ ਵਿੱਚ। I'd like to thank you very much for giving us your time in this busy schedule of yours, and we welcome you on the show.
Sat Sri Akal, and to all of your viewers as well. It's a real pleasure and an honour to be here.
Parmjit Singh ji, before we start, I would say we need to know some of the history of Parmjit Singh Dhanda's life. Were you born in the UK, where life started, and parents? If you can just share that with the viewers.
Well, it's a classic kind of Sikh Punjabi West London story, I think.
Okay.
And I've been talking a lot to Mum and Dad about the early days. They came in 1963, in my father's case.
Right.
You'll probably correct me from Punjab.
Okay.
He'll say 61, 63, I think it was 63.
Okay.
And Mum 2 years later in 65,
Sure.
Beresford Road in Southall.
Okay.
And within, I think he arrived in January, and within about 2 weeks, he was in his first job as a tool setter.
Okay.
And it snowed really, really heavily.
Right.
He managed to get there on his first day. And then Mum, when she came over, he brought her over. They got married in a little house in Townsend Road in Southall. I saw the wedding pictures the other day, actually. It's very, very lovely pictures.
Sure.
And Sadinyanali Mulakaat, it's a very unusual story for them and their lives now.
Yeah.
But they were what we say in England, betrothed,
Sure.
when my father was 16 and my mother was 11.
Okay.
Because my paternal grandfather, my papaji, he was in the army.
Right.
And through a friend of his, the arrangement, Mum was from Selempur,
Okay.
and Dad from our village of Dhanda back home,
Right.
both in Punjab. But they hadn't actually met each other until 1965 at the airport. Not an uncommon story, actually, for our community. And I said to him, I suppose it's one of those stories that children perhaps don't always ask their parents. I said, weren't you worried at all, you know, because somebody you better spend the rest of your life with?
Sure.
And he said, no, I think they were both very lucky. They were a good match for each other.
Sure.
And all these years later, you know, 7 grandchildren,
Okay.
3 children. I was the youngest of 3, born in 1971,
Okay.
in Hillingdon Hospital.
Okay.
Mummy ji utthe cleaner sigi.
In the hospital.
She was a cleaner at the hospital when I was born.
Okay.
She worked as a cleaner for 20 years afterwards, 25 years I think, Ealing Hospital and Hillingdon Hospital.
Sure.
So it was quite funny. I came in as the youngest of 3 children.
Sure.
9 pounds 4 ounces, a big baby.
Healthy baby.
Healthy baby. My first experience of life was all of the other cleaners on the shift saying, "Kudi ni choti hai, nyana inna badda hai na," and passing me around because I was quite a big but healthy and smiley baby.
Sure.
Being passed around the other cleaners in the ward in the hospital that I was born in, and so very working class roots, and
Right.
you never forget that if
Yeah.
you're born in a community like that.
Sure. Sure.
So that's the early days, but then growing up,
Educated in education.
education it began in Southall.
Okay.
We moved, I think, about 200 yards over the Hay Southall Bridge, past the Hamborough Tavern pub, which was burnt down in the 1977 Southall riots.
Sure.
Could hear it burning down from the bedroom window in Hayes, on Berwick Avenue, where we lived.
Right.
Mum and Dad still live, where I grew up.
Yes.
ਉਸ ਤੋਂ ਮੇਰੇ ਲਈ ਬਹੁਤ ਵੱਡਾ step ਸੀਗਾ in life. From there I managed to go, well, first to university in Nottingham, then but when I was 28 years old, I was selected for the first parliamentary seat I ever went for, which was Gloucester, a long way from home.
Yeah, that's quite shocking because I was reading about it, and a young man born and brought up in Southall, Little Punjab,
Hanji,
goes to Gloucester.
Hanji. A real shock. And 100 people applied for the job.
Okay.
And because it was a retiring MP,
Right.
मेरी पहली selection से किया, I'd never done it before.
Okay.
I had been a Euro candidate in West London. I'd been the organiser for the Labour Party at the 1997 election. So I knew all of the West London councillors. Verinder Sharma I was the agent for when he was a local councillor, so I knew him very well.
Right.
I was his agent. I was the agent of all of the Ealing councillors.
Okay.
But after 1997 and the big victory in Piara Cabra in Southall and Steve Pound in Ealing North, Clive Soley in Acton, they said to me, "Apna munda ya, sade young MP vi chahide hain, why don't you have a go yourself?" So I said, "Well, I'll have a go at the Euros," and I was selected at 27, and that election happened. I never wanted to be an MEP, but it was a great chance for me to have a start and a practice.
Okay.
And so 1999, I put my hat in the ring for this seat. I was up against some wonderful candidates.
Is that for the MEP?
No, for 1999, I was the MEP candidate, one of the MEP candidates.
Right.
I didn't get elected in that election.
Okay.
But afterwards, I thought, by then I'd become a councillor in Hillingdon as well, in Hayes, where in the ward that we lived in.
Sure.
And I thought, well, I'd like to have a go at a parliamentary seat.
Sure.
And there wasn't many seats coming up. Because we had a big majority by then, 179. So you had to wait for what they used to call dead man's shoes, where somebody either died or somebody retired. But I was still a young man, I was 28, so I applied for Gloucester.
So what age did you actually start into active politics? Was it before 28 or was it?
Probably, well, when I was 17 at school, I joined the Labour Party.
17?
17. In the late 1980s, Margaret Thatcher was Prime Minister. So, and at home we always used to talk. We used to drink cha on a Sunday morning and sit on Mum and Dad's bedroom. And we used to talk about current affairs. And we used to talk about politics. So I was very aware, with Mum being a cleaner in the NHS and Dad having lots of tough jobs, becoming a truck driver, having to do long shifts, drive a truck from London to Manchester overnight, then help unload it. I used to worry a lot about their lives and the quality of their lives. And it got me thinking. I just thought, why is life so easy for some people, but if you go to a school like mine, in Hayes, why do very few people go to university? Why should the quality of our education be worse than for others? And it made me political. It was the time after the miners' strike, the Falklands War, all these things were happening, and it kind of politicised me. And I think also in our own community, I think the Southall riots, watching them happen, the death of a man called Blair Peach in race riots at that time. I didn't really realise it at the time, but ਜਦੋਂ ਮੈਂ MP ਬਣ ਗਿਆ in 2001, the BBC came and wanted to do a documentary called Big Dreams, and it was about my parents' generation. And they came here with nothing, £2 in their pocket, in my father's case, but with big dreams about their children. And they said, we'd like to talk about your early life. So it made me think, and they met my grandfather and talked about his time in World War II in Burma. They talked to my mum and dad about their experiences and racism, about working in the wards when people would say, you come here to nick our jobs. Mum didn't speak much English, but she could say, she had the mop in her hand, and she could say to people, "Tusi kar la."
Traditional Punjabi side.
Yeah, exactly. But her experience was, ਉਹਨਾਂ ਦੀ union ਸੀਗੀ ਉੱਥੇ, hospital ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ. National Union of Public Employees, that was the union. And they said, ਤੇਰੇ ਕੋਲ ਦਿਮਾਗ ਹੈਗਾ ਆ, ਤੇਰੇ ਕੋਲ, ਆਵਾਜ਼ ਵੀ ਹੈਗੀ ਆ, ਨਾ? And we need someone like you to represent all of the Asian women who are cleaners, because we need people representing people like you. She can manage karna, it's not for me. They said, look, ਜੇ ਤੁਸੀਂ ਕਰਦੇ ਤੁਸੀਂ ਸਾਡਾ shop steward ਬਣ ਜਾਓ. If you do it, we'll send you on a course to teach you to read and write in English. And she said, okay, ਫਿਰ ਮੈਂ ਕਰ ਲੂੰਗੀ. And bit by bit, she met a lot of people involved in the trade unions, but also in politics. There was an MP called Bernie Grant, who worked for Unison at the time. She knew him. She met a man called Rodney Bickerstaff, who went on to become General Secretary of the Union. And at the age of 5, I was being sent to school with badges, with NUPE, National Union of Public Employees, written on them, a little gold Nupi pens. I didn't know what it was, but
it was a badge
it was a badge of honour for me. But looking back, maybe these things and the Southall riots and the poverty, relative poverty that we lived in, the community, where we had to fight for everything.
Definitely.
You know, my dad still tells me about joining the Indian Workers Association in the 1960s in Southall.
Okay.
Piara Cabra
Yes.
was recruiting big style.
Okay.
And in the end, he went into a big battle with the local MP for the seat in 1992, deselected the white MP for Southall, Sidney Bidwell. Amazing story, I've been researching it lately.
Okay.
And big battle, thousands of people joined the party, but he became the first Sikh MP
in the
United Kingdom, the first one. And they couldn't really stop him. I was talking a little while ago to Neil Kinnock, who was the leader of the Labour Party.
Sure.
I said, Neil, you were living in Ealing at the time. We were talking about all of these things happening, you know, big recruitment, big fights in the Labour Party. But Piara Cabra, he took his destiny into his own hands. And that's an important message for all of us Sikhs, I think, sometimes, because we see now in the Labour Party, ਜਦੋਂ ਮੈਂ ਬਣਿਆ ਸੀ in 2001, four
MPs.
Three MPs and one in the House of Lords.
Okay.
All good friends of mine.
Sure.
It was Piara Cabra, sadly he died in 2007. Vrinder became a very good member of Parliament there in Southall. Masha Singh in Bradford. Ovi mar gaya, sadly he died, passed away, I think it was 2 years ago. The third one was Lord Tersem King, again, very good friend of mine from West Bromwich. He passed away a couple of years ago. I'm the last survivor of that group. I lost my seat in 2010 in Gloucester. So I'm the last surviving Labour Sikh parliamentarian. That makes me feel not happy, but very, very sad.
It is.
And I hope some of the people watching this programme get angry about it, because these are the people that can change that.
Sure.
And we need them to do that.
That is the reason we're trying from, as you know, media is a big thing, and with the Sikh Sangha TV, we are trying to see that it connects, you connect with the other people. Okay? We live, this is my country. I live here. My family lives here. I pay my taxes here. For so many years, probably my whole life is here. And
like my parents, you've spent more of your life here than back home in India.
And you ask to other people, they're not interested who the Prime Minister is. The mainstream politics don't want to know.
Yes.
All the talk is, what's it got to do with us at the moment here?
I remember when I was a minister in government, they would come and they would lobby, and I was really grateful for the opportunity because I was a minister for race and faith groups. So I got some action happening on issues like our articles of faith, the right to wear the Qur'an, the right to be able to go into government buildings without being checked. All of these things were happening. I was bringing in representatives of Gurdwaras. You know, we were talking about Ranjit Singh.
Yes.
I got him to come into communities and local government. I got the Pradhan of the biggest Gurdwara in South, the biggest Sikh Gurdwara outside of the Punjab, in fact, to be one of our people who would be a consultee along with the other faith groups as well, that's the traditional ones that were there. But if we don't have representation, we can't develop these issues and we can't make these changes.
And we can't have a say.
We
have to have a say.
And then we get jealous.
You get jealous.
People get jealous. They say, well, the Hindus have got this, or the Muslims have got this, or the Jewish community have got this. But we have to
put the effort in. We have to be in there. Parmjit, I think it's important for our viewers to also know that you were the first Sikh minister in the history of Parliament in this country. Is that correct?
Sadly, I was... great, wonderful that I was the first. Sadly, I'm still the last, and it would be great if I wasn't. I'm happy being the first, but I don't want to be the last. So, yes, unfortunately, I'm the only one that there has been from a Sikh background in the UK. And also, actually, I was the first British-born minister of Indian heritage in this country as well.
I mean, when we read in the world nowadays, you look at Canadian politics, you see our Sikh ministers in power in this part of the world where we have a very big community and all coming up. You feel really happy and you feel really proud that we are part of the national politics of that country where we live, where that's their home, and they're doing something. Yeah. And for not just for the Sikh, for the whole community.
Yes.
It is our duty to be a part of one interfaith country where multi-faith is all over in this part of the world. So we represent everybody, we're part of it. Yeah. And that's where I think we in the UK feel very sad sometimes to not see that as parliamentarians or in mainstream politics, very minimal.
Yeah, I think there are actually barriers as well within political parties that we have to overcome.
Right. Okay.
I've just written a book about it actually, which will be coming out in a few weeks. A few weeks' time, called "My Political Race." Maybe we'll come back and talk about it.
Sure,
at some stage.
definitely. Yeah.
But it's about my story and the battle to be selected. When I was selected, and I had to beat 100 other people in 2000 for the 2001 election.
So how did you get selected in that Gloucester seat?
It was a curious story. Okay. Maybe it'll never be replicated again. I hope it will be, but it's the 95% white constituency.
Yeah.
I'd never been there before in my life. I couldn't find it on a map. I was in Southall, having my hair cut.
Okay.
And I was reading the newspaper, flicking through, looked in the Daily Express and read Tess Kingham, the local MP for Gloucester, is going to stand down. And I'd worked for the Labour Party as an organiser, so I rang a few people up and they said, "Oh, nothing's happening. So I went down there, met a few people. I heard, the leader of the council, who's very good, he stood there before as the Labour candidate, he's going to stand. So I thought, okay, maybe I should be a bit careful. Maybe I shouldn't put my hand in for it. Then I heard Jan Royal, who had worked for Neil Kinnock, had worked for Tony Blair, went to school locally, is now in the House of Lords as leader of the Labour Party in the Lords. She was going to put in for it. So I thought, oh my goodness. Then I heard that the PA to Tess Kingham, Sue Heyman is her name, was also going to stand for it. And so there were about 100 others, over 90 CVs in the end. So it was going to be hugely competitive. But I went down there. I was young, I was 28 at the time. I wasn't going to be put off. Some people did try to put me off actually and said, well, why don't you wait for Southall to come up? Why don't you go to Birmingham somewhere? Why don't you go to Wolverhampton? I said, well, if I wait for things to fall into my lap, I could be waiting a very long time.
Sure.
So I resisted their calls, and before I knew it, all of the local parties, wards, local branches met. Before I knew it, I'd won more nominations than all of the others. So I was on the short list. Even then, there were calls coming in saying, tell him to pull out. We need someone appropriate for a seat like this. This is the seat Labour need for a majority of one in government. What if he gets selected, brown face in a white seat, Munda Punjabiya, Guriana seat here. We could lose this. We don't want to lose a seat like this. So I a little bit. I thought, I don't want to cause any pain. But all these people now have nominated me. I thought, well, a party the member locally. Another decision I'm going to go to that meeting. I'm going to make my speech in front of these people. And I'm going to let them decide. So on the night, about 200 people in Shire Hall in Gloucester, 6 of us on the short list. And I got up to speak. I did my speech and I said, Gemma, MB I'm going to live here. I'm going to make this my home. My children will be born here. And these are the things I will do for you. I don't want to be someone. I want to do something. And these are the things that I want to do. And I looked around the Gloucester docks, the things that needed to be done there, the things that they wanted, their ambitions. And I think that night they just thought, here is somebody young and vibrant, who's been a councillor, albeit in London, who's worked for a trade union, has been involved in the Labour Party. And he has real passion. He's done a good speech. And maybe he can start to deliver some of these things. And then I took the questions. And I could see, I think it was two faces that weren't white. One Afro-Caribbean woman, Carol Francis Olanasiga, that lovely woman, and a man called Hakim, Ghulam Hakim, nice man as well. I took the questions, I answered the questions, and the last question came up, and I thought, this is going really well. This is going really well. Mr. Hakim thought he was doing me a favour by asking a nice question, and he said, Mr. Parmjit, he said, this constituency is all white. There are a few of us here who are not white, and they are either West Indian or they're like me, they're Gujarati Muslims. What hope have you got of winning if we choose you? And I thought, Mr. Hakim, thank you very much. That's blown it for me. But he did me the biggest favour of my life in some ways, because I had to confront the issue.
Sure.
And I said, well, in politics, people have always said we must get over these barriers and be more inclusive. I said, I don't want any favours from any of you. If I'm not the best tonight, don't choose me. But if I am the best, don't choose somebody else because of the colour of my skin, or because I'm Punjabi, or because I'm a Sikh, all of these things. And I said, so isn't this the right time? If not here, then where? And I finished by saying, and if not now,
when?
Then when? And then we went for they counted the votes, and I won on the first round. As they counted the number ones, then my lead got bigger. And then everybody was crowded round. And before I knew it, there I was, 28 years old, and the guy reading out the results said, and the winner is Mr. Parmjit Singh Dhanda. And it was bedlam, it was crazy, phones were ringing, I had to do interviews and cameras in my face and all the rest of it. I hadn't come to terms with what I'd done. I went in, spoke to the party and gave them a message and said, tomorrow morning, kisi kam karna hai, we'll start work. Shuru karna hai, karna. And then I was just leaving the room as everybody's patting me on the back, and I thought, I haven't even told my parents yet. So I rang them up, and you know what parents are like, and they were worried. I think I could sense in their, Dad picked up the phone, he said, in his voice I could just tell he was kind of, he knew I hadn't won, but he didn't want me to be affected by it. I know, parents worry for their children. So I said, my first worry was for them, because parents get excited. So I wanted to calm them down. I said, look, and they could hear all this noise in the background, people were still patting me on the stairs of Shire Hall going down. I just said, I haven't got much time, but stay calm. Nothing's been won, but I got it. And that moment, that kind of, you hear this pause, and then you hear the tears, and then he said to Mum, ban gaya, sara munda ban gaya, and I could hear a shriek in the background. And I can still, thinking back, I can still hear that moment and feel that moment. It was and I think I wrote in the book, I said, at the age of 28, that moment in my life, I could have died a happy man that night, you know. But it was just the beginning. And by the age of 29, we won the seat. Had some terrible racism to face before then. The local newspaper said, Munda Punjabi hai, London to aaya, ithe nahi jeet sakta. Enu kale paaya, onu das de, Labour Party nu das do, onu kad do enu. You know, get someone suitable for a cathedral seat in West London. And that was the local newspaper. This was within a couple of weeks of my selection. So it was really hard for a young man. First time really away from home, other than my university days, because I was still living at home with Mum and Dad in Hayes. So I bought a flat, I dug in, I worked. But the full story, I mean, without wanting to sell the book on air, but I mean, you'll see a lot more about how it happened. But then I was elected. And I was lucky enough, I mean, Tony Blair was very good to me, and I got re-elected with a bigger majority in 2005. My majority went up, despite the Iraq war. I mean, I voted against the war in Iraq, but maybe that helped me. And Tony rang me up and said, Lucy, Minister Banjo, Sada, you've done a good job. I want you as a minister. And I know pata sega as well, koi Sikh bane nahi si. In fact, I remember him talking to me. He said, Parmjit, tu Sikh hai na? I said, he didn't say it in Punjabi, he said it in English. He said, Parmjit, you're a Sikh, aren't you? We were just about to have our photo taken for one of those photo shoots, huge line of MPs behind him. He made all of the others stop so we could have a conversation, and he said, you're a Sikh, aren't you? I said, yeah. He said, David Cameron says we've got no Sikhs. I said, well, there is this Pyara Kabra, there's Masha Singh, and there's me, and there's the Sem and the Lords as well. He goes, yeah, I thought so, he said. And then he had me in one day and wanted to talk about the faith and know more about it. Yeah. And we had a good chat. He was really interested in what was going on. Sure. So, but anyway, he made me an education minister, which was a great time. You know, I got to visit so many wonderful schools like this one that we're in now, and I made some changes to laws about protecting children, vulnerable children from abuse and stuff like that, and children in the care system. And then Gordon became leader, and I was minister for communities and local government with him, including race and the faith communities. Hence, I did a lot of things for the for our community, the Sikh community at the time, but with other faiths as well. Sure. A lot more to do still, actually. A lot more to do. Yeah. And I was also minister for the fire and rescue service as well. What a challenge that was. £200 million annual budget, 50,000 firefighters, 10,000 appliances. And we made some radical changes there as well. We bought 3,000 smoke alarms and fitted them to people's homes to save lives instead of just putting out fires. So very privileged, very lucky. Come 2010, very marginal seat. Gloucester always was going to be a marginal seat. Sure. And we knew if we lost the government, we were likely to lose the seat. Fought very, very hard, but we lost. And there we are. That was my 9 years and my story in Parliament.
Sure. Going through this political career of yours and in the mainstream politics of the country, you must have opportunities to visit other parts of the world. Probably, I don't know whether you visited in power as a minister to India. We had a lot of people who asked, did you go to India as a minister? Yes. Did you manage to do that?
I did. I went to India. I visited a number of places, Mumbai, Delhi, also some of the economic hubs as well, Bangalore to see the IT industry.
Was that with the Prime Minister or that was your own?
No, that was a group of MPs that went out there together. And it's quite funny, although I lobbied hard for us to go to Punjab, we didn't go to Punjab on that visit. But families being what families are, our families being what they are. My mama found out, all my mamas found out while they're out there, and they said, Parmjit, you must come to Punjab. I said, look, we've got a really busy schedule. So a lot of them came to visit me while we were in Delhi, actually. So we got together and I introduced them all to all of these other MPs that were out there with me. And we talked about some really important issues, actually, while we were out there on the delegation as well. And I got to visit Gujarat, where a lot of my constituents in Gloucester are Muslims from Gujarat, actually. And we saw the devastation of the earthquake. And we helped to raise some money for charity there as well, and presented a cheque to the Gujarat state government there. And we actually saw one of the local schools that had been rebuilt, and there was a plaque there, and it said, money raised by, I believe it was, Wolverhampton Council, actually. It was certainly Wolverhampton related. The people of Wolverhampton raised some money. So it was great to see British money raised over here, helping and making a difference back home.
Yeah, I think so. That is a very big thing in the British community, that as donations and helping and the needy all over the world, when you look at whenever anything happens, how generous these countries are in helping the needy. And that, I think, so is one of the biggest savor the community does. That's my opinion of things, because you see straight away millions are raised, wherever in the world it is.
And I think seva is a really important word here. In fact, I remember the very first event I ever spoke to when I was made a government minister. And there was a group of us, MPs, talking to charities. And I said, I want to talk about my roots, where I came from, because it's obvious looking at us. I was a bit different to the others. I was younger than them, but also from an Asian background. And I said, charity and what we do with you is really important. But for people like me, it isn't just about raising money. It's about our mindset, because I'm a Sikh, I'm Punjabi, and it's about service. This word's seva. And I said seva. Seva is something that we use. I actually visited a charity in India called Seva as well, which was an Indian, it was actually a women's charity, which had set up their own bank for which only women could actually visit, but which was an interesting way of kind of building up capacity in a community. But I said to them, look, if you go to a Sikh temple, you go to a Gurdwara, one of the ways that we can actually help each other, and it's good, I think, in terms of mindset. You see it in other faiths as well. It's not just about our faith and our community. Christians will say it's a very Christian thing as well, to break bread, to give, to feed, to serve behind the counter. And I think it's ever so important that people know more about our history, especially at a time when immigration is such a hot topic.
Definitely.
I used to talk about my grandfather quite a lot, both of my grandfathers, but I think one was of particular interest when I was an MP to a military town like Gloucester, where people always talk about, the wars, the First World War, the Great War, the Second World War. And I talked to the Ministry of Defence. I said, look, I think something gets forgotten here, because there are many, many other communities that fought in these wars.
Definitely.
83,000 Sikhs died in the First World War. And the moment I said, because one of again, something else you read about in the book, unfortunately, it was quite a painful thing for me at the time, was at a visit, I think William Hague had come to, William Hague was leader of the Tory party during the 2001 campaign, and he stepped off the bus. I think lots of Labour people were there giving him a tough time. This happens in elections, it happens the other way around as well. And a Tory councillor shouted back and said, I wasn't there, but I heard about it afterwards. He shouted back, he said, your candidate, I bet his grandfather, he wasn't in Dunkirk, was he? And he's right, he wasn't in Dunkirk. He was in the Royal Bengal Engineers in Burma. That's where my grandfather was, fighting for king and country and the British Empire in the Second World War. And I thought, if I ever get elected, I want to do something about this. And I did at a speech at a Labour Party conference, which obviously went down very well with the Labour audience. But also with the Ministry of Defence, we then went around the country. We started in Gloucester, but we did it in many other parts of the country, into town centres where we set up little exhibitions of local people. Local, whether it was Afro-Caribbean people, or whether it was Asian people, or Sikh people, or Hindu people, who had fought or served in the wars with the British forces. So people would walk along these town centres and they would see the We Were There exhibition, that's what it's called, We Were There, and they'd say, my goodness, maybe in a small way that helped to change people's attitudes, because they'd say, this man here, with his turban and his beard on his head, he was in the British Army, or he was in the Indian Army serving with our forces. And ever since that happened, I used to get every year, when I put my wreath down on Remembrance Sunday, in every November, as the local MP, people would come up to me and said, I read about your grandfather, good man, And the Royal British Legion in Gloucester always used to make mention of the fact, oh look, over there's a flag, we raise it every year. Well, look at that, it's the Burma Star Regiment, has strong military links with Gloucester. Think of your grandfather when you look at that. And I would say to anybody watching this, of other extractions, obviously you've got a big audience from our diaspora as well, Khushdev ji. But think back to that generation and never be embarrassed about being in this country and our contribution. And never forget, whether you want to be a lawyer, whether you want to be a doctor, whether you want to be in the military, whether you want to be a head teacher of a school, whether you want to be a politician, remember the spirit of the Sikhs who fought for what they did. You know, they fought for their countries, they fought for the empire, and I sometimes feel, sometimes we can be very, very polite, we can be shrinking violets sometimes, which is good because we're decent people.
Definitely.
It comes from our upbringing, we're well brought up.
In blood.
But don't forget our fighting spirit as well, because at times in my life, I'm sure that the whole kind of the military aspect, the kind of maybe the paternal grandfather in me who was in the army has had to get me through some tough times. Because if I hadn't fought and stood my ground, when other people would have said, well, he's not the right person, or we'll have one of our own in there, I would never have, I've never been an MP, I would never have been a minister of this government, and I would never have been able to do the things that I was lucky enough to be able to do for this country.
Very valid point which you've mentioned. The contribution of Sikh soldiers, World War I and World War II. Because you were talking about your grandfather. My grandfather served in the Army Service Corps.
Really?
Yeah, the British Army.
Yes.
So every majority of
which in conflict as well, was it?
Yeah, I think it was in the First World War. Then he served in Singapore as well for the British Army. He was in the army for nearly 20, 25 years. And he's got his badges, which he handed over to me so I can wear them. Yeah? And it's a very proud thing for us.
Yes.
Yeah? Part of our heritage that we've contributed to the empire, the British Empire, which they were part serving army in those times. And we are very proud of that.
There's a service ethic there, whether it was through the military or just as important in its own way is the other generations that came here and worked really hard and had nothing that cleans the hospital floors like Mum did, or driving trucks, or was tool setters like Dad did, and you know your uncles, aunts, your cousins will have done as well.
Everybody.
It was a battle. It was a battle, but it was, I think, a very worthy way to live a lifestyle, to be able to afford to give your kids a decent life, to buy a home, and in very, very many cases, to build a gurdwara as well.
And you know, we look at all over the country, you go, oh, it's beautiful gurdwaras, Maharaji Bakshish all over the UK, and you feel very, very humbled as a Sikh. You know, I mean, ਸਾਡੇ ਸਿੱਖੀ ਪ੍ਰਫੁੱਲਤ ਹੋ ਰਹੀ ਹੈ. And it's happy.
Isn't it wonderful as well, Khushdev ji, the way that we've adapted around the world? I was lucky enough to do a visit to the United States. And they took me around to see all of these places. They said, what would you really like to see? I said, look, yes, I'm a British politician, but you know where my roots are, you know where I'm from. So while I'm in America, can I visit gurdwaras while I'm out there? And I had this wonderful experience out in California, where over here, when our youngsters do well, they might have a football team, let's say, and they'll get their little awards or whatever. Sometimes in gurdwaras as well, they do that, which is a wonderful thing. And I got to see this group of 5-year-old children in a gurdwara. They'd all been playing basketball, you know, a bit alien to us, but they'd all been out there playing basketball and they'd won a little trophy, and I got to give them their awards. And instead of saying, you know, Sasikal or thank you, Ji, there was all kind of, yay, mister, thank you very much, in their wonderful little American accents. And they were very, obviously, Punjabi children as well. There they were, having won their basketball awards in their little American accents. But they hadn't forgotten where they'd come from. I think it was ever so important.
It's our roots. You know, we are very privileged. You know, Guru Maharaj di Bakshish Sadaka, that as Sikhs, we are very privileged. Jo Maharaj ne sanu sool dasse ne, and you look all around the world, you know, I mean, you listen to other religions when they say this is the only religion ਜਿੱਥੇ ਗੁਰੂ ਕਾ ਲੰਗਰ ਕਿਤੇ ਚਲੇ ਜਾਓ ਦੁਨੀਆ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਗੁਰੂ ਕਾ ਲੰਗਰ ਦੀ ਤੋਟ ਨਹੀਂ ਆਉਂਦੀ ਹਾਂਜੀ ਐਸਾ ਗੁਰੂ ਮਹਾਰਾਜ ਸਾਡੀ ਬਖਸ਼ਿਸ਼ ਸਿੱਖਾਂ ਤੇ ਹੈ ਐਂਡ ਐਸਾ ਸਿੱਖਾਂ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਗੁਰੂ ਮਹਾਰਾਜ ਨੇ ਕੁੱਟ ਕੇ ਸੇਵਾ ਦਾ ਭਰਿਆ ਹੈ ਕਿ ਯੂ نو we were from Kenya, and Makindo is one of the Sikh temples en route from the capital Nairobi to Mombasa. We talked many times that at that place, it's in halfway, nothing around it.
Yes.
And there is no plan how many Sangat is going to come. The buses of coaches of tourism, the president would stop for langar. And you see how Maharaj Bakshi, it's non-stop all day long. and you feel so humbled and privileged and
Yeah.
thank the Almighty ਕਿ ਸੱਚੇ ਪਾਤਸ਼ਾਹ ਸਾਨੂੰ ਤੁਸੀਂ ਵਿਰਸੇ 'ਚ ਕਿੱਡਾ ਉੱਚੀ ਇੱਕ ਚੀਜ਼ ਬਖਸ਼ੀ ਹੈ ਕਿ ਅਸੀਂ ਕਿਰਤ ਕਮਾਈ ਕਰਕੇ I was reading an article ਪਰਮਜੀਤ ਜੀ ਕਿ ਗੁਰਦੁਆਰੇ ਕਹਿੰਦੇ ਆਟੇ ਦਾ ਬੈਗ ਚੜਾਉਣਾ
ਹਾਂਜੀ
ਠੀਕ ਹੈ ਤੁਸੀਂ ਸੇਵਾ ਕੀਤੀ ਜਿਹੜਾ ਉਹ ਚਲਾਇਆ ਉਹਨੂੰ ਗੁੰਨ ਕੇ ਉਹਦੇ ਪ੍ਰਸ਼ਾਦੇ ਬਣਾਉਣੇ ਦੀ ਸੇਵਾ ਜ਼ਿਆਦਾ ਉੱਤਮ ਕਰੀ
Yeah.
ਕਿੱਡੇ ਸਾਡੇ ਗੁਰੂ ਮਹਾਰਾਜ ਨੇ ਸਾਨੂੰ ਸਿੱਖੀ ਬਰੀਕੀ ਵੀ ਸਮਝਾਈ ਹੈ
ਹਾਂਜੀ
ਨਿਮਰਤਾ ਦੀ ਦੂਜੇ ਧਰਮ ਵਾਲੇ ਨੇ ਇੱਕ ਤੇ ਕਮੈਂਟ ਕੀਤੇ ਕਿ ਜੀ ਇੱਕ ਇਹੀ ਧਰਮ ਹੈ ਜਿਸ ਦੀ ਸੇਵਾ ਵਿੱਚ ਅਮੀਰ ਵੀ ਤੇ ਗਰੀਬ ਵੀ ਪੋਚਾ ਦਿੰਦਾ ਹੈ
Yeah.
ਉੱਥੇ ਕੋਈ ਫਰਕ ਨਹੀਂ ਹੈ
ਹਾਂਜੀ ਕੋਈ ਫਰਕ ਨਹੀਂ Yeah.
ਇਕੱਠੇ ਬੈਠ ਕੇ ਲੰਗਰ ਛਕਦੇ ਹਾਂ ਇਹ ਸਾਡਾ ਵਿਰਸਾ ਕਿੱਡਾ ਉੱਚਾ ਹੈ and we can't thank ਵਾਹਿਗੁਰੂ ਸੱਚੇ ਪਾਤਸ਼ਾਹ ਕਿ ਸਾਡੇ ਤੇ ਰਹਿਮਤ ਕਿੰਨੀ ਕੀਤੀ ਹੈ and now looking forward with our generations now we look today successful Punjabis all over the world very successful you read articles it's a very hard working community ਬੜੀ ਮਿਹਨਤ ਕਰਦੇ ਨੇ ਜੀ they have very top lawyers top business people top doctors you name it education is top. The only thing which I think personally is lacking in the UK is top politicians to come into the...
I agree.
Yeah.
It's a huge problem.
It's a huge problem.
I think it's something that the parties, all of the parties actually need to tackle.
Yeah.
I'm not coming at this from a party political view.
No. Yeah.
I know Paul Uppal,
Yeah.
who's the only Conservative member of the House of Commons.
Sure.
You know, I have a lot of respect for his achievement,
Sure.
To what
Definitely.
he managed to do.
Yeah.
I know Parmjit Singh Gill, who was elected and lost in Leicester in 2005, but he was an MP there for a period of time as well.
Sure.
And we met a little while ago at a Sikh manifesto event.
Sure.
All of the parties, and I've done some research on this, need to do an awful lot more in terms of reflecting ethnic minority communities.
Sure.
But the deficit in Sikh representation is shocking.
Shocking. Very big.
And you can't just, doesn't matter who you are or which party you are, if you come to these people at election time and say, please vote for us, well, actually, it's a two-way process.
Sure.
And parties need to become better at that in terms of engaging them.
Yeah.
We have a job as well to do in terms of becoming more engaged.
Yeah.
Sadly, I don't think, looking ahead, in 2015 it's not obviously going to change in a hurry.
Yeah.
And I desperately want it to.
Sure.
And I will do everything in my power to try to get an attitude change, I think, in politics.
Yeah.
And also I think some communities are doing quite well in politics. They're quite organised.
Sure.
And when you're organised, you can deliver for your people, and you deliver your elected representatives. Perhaps we haven't been very well organised in the Sikh community. There was that period I mentioned in the 60s, the Indian Workers Association, which I suppose ended up with the rise of Pura Kalbra.
Sure.
Did it work? Did it happen for me? Well, in Gloucester, no. Actually, it was there were no ethnic minority people, let alone there was no Sikh people in the Labour Party in Gloucester. Maybe what happened to me was a bit of a freak, but maybe we do need to do more to champion our people and get them into the House of Commons and get them into the House of Lords. And I've always, I'm always keen for people to get in touch with me if they wanted to stand, and I want to encourage them and help support and nurture them as well.
It's not like it's a saying in Punjabi ਕਿ ਅੱਜ ਕੱਲ੍ਹ ਦੇ ਸਮੇਂ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਕਲਮ ਦੀ ਮਾਰ ਹੈ. Gone are the days of shouting. You should be doing things in the way with the law, and then you can succeed.
You have to do it within systems.
Yeah.
But ਫਿਰ ਵੀ system ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਵੀ problem ਹੁੰਦੇ ਆ.
Yeah.
We've seen that throughout our lives.
Yeah. But
one of the things I can think back is in the 1990s. ਜਦੋਂ Stephen Lawrence ਦੀ murder ਹੋਈ ਸੀ ਯਾਦ ਹੈ
ਹਾਂਜੀ ਬਿਲਕੁਲ
and the way his family were treated the system wasn't right. So we had a huge inquiry into it, and they came up with this idea that there was institutional racism in the police. Very controversial thing to say, but it made us look at the systems and how we operate to look out better. And all I would say is we must do more as a community, but parties have to do more as well. It's a two-way process.
dil tak karda galbat da silsila we can carry on, but
could.
we're running out of time. I'd like to thank you very much for giving us your valued time, and I think ਸਾਡੇ ਦਰਸ਼ਕਾਂ ਨੂੰ, our younger viewers would have got a lot of info, a lot of things to experience from your experience in politics and in your life, and would have touched a lot of people on the topic of politics. And which you want to say something before we...
Just to say that this is a television program.
Sure.
And television programs should be fun, should be interesting.
Sure.
And if for the last, I don't know, time's gone very quickly, last 45, 50 minutes, if we've done something to that people have found enjoyable, that's a good thing. But also, I hope between us and from our experiences, it's been a very delightful and enjoyable conversation. I hope it's made people think a little bit as well.
Yes.
If it's done that, then I think we've achieved something today. Yeah.
Thank you very much. Apna aghe liye. Waheguru ji ka khalsa, Waheguru ji ki fateh.